In a small American town along the main street walked a man by the name of Boyd Stevens. He was the local sheriff who rang his handbell, thereby reminding people of the approaching night. To his right stood a local cafeteria where a girl named Sarah Myers worked as a waitress. The establishment was just closing, and she was seeing the last visitors out. She then locked the door by turning the key several times and, most importantly, checked the protective amulet that hung right beside the entrance. The sheriff continued his procession through town, ringing his bell. An 8-year-old girl named Megan was still resting on a swing when her mother Lauren came out onto the porch and called her daughter inside. The sheriff, passing near their home, reminded Megan to listen to her mother, and then continued on his way, passing cars parked along a roadside with flat tires. Meanwhile, in the building of the local school, an old gentleman named John Chen Liu was playing chess with his son Kenny Liu, who served as Sheriff Boyd's deputy. At the height of the game, a girl named Christy, who worked as a medic in this town, approached them. She told the players that it was time to finish and go down to the basement. Growing agitated, Mr. Liu scattered the chess pieces to the side, whereupon Christy leaned toward him, saying, "Don't worry, Gina will take you to the basement, and in the morning you will return again." At that moment, the nurse named Gina appeared and took Mr. Liu away. Later, Christy and Kenny went outside, where they began discussing Christy's kind treatment of his father, and then after a brief silence they said goodbye with smiles on their lips. It seemed they liked each other, yet said nothing. After that, Christy went inside and made a point of checking the protective amulet that hung near the door. Toward evening, the sheriff watched people playing near their homes. Kenny came up to him and reported that everything in town was in order, whereupon the sheriff sent him home to rest, and the townspeople finally began going indoors before darkness fell. Then Boyd returned to the building of the local post office where he slept, and on the wall hung a chalk-written sign that read, 96 nights without incidents. Meanwhile, in the old bar, a drunk man named Frank Pratt lay sprawled on the floor. He had drunk far too much and was unable to make it home to his wife and daughter. The owner of the establishment, a man named Tom, tried to wake him but got nowhere, and after locking the door and drawing the curtains, also checked the protective amulet that hung near the door. At the same time, Frank's wife and daughter were waiting for him, standing on the threshold of their home. The daughter asked when Daddy was coming, since he had promised her he would definitely return home. It was time for the girl to go to her room for her evening prayer. Finally, terrible darkness descended upon the town. Megan, kneeling beside her bed, slowly recited a prayer for the health of her family. When she finished, she began making her bed when she suddenly heard a knock on the window. Frightened, she grabbed her teddy bear, but then heard the words, "Megan, it's Grandma, come to the window. I won't tell anyone." The girl quickly went over and raised the blinds, behind which stood an old woman on the street outside. At that moment, Lauren came upstairs and entered her daughter's room. The old woman kept repeating that she was cold and that Megan had to open the window and let her in. Lauren told her daughter this was not her grandmother, but the girl would not listen and opened the window. At that moment, the woman transformed into a horrifying, terrifying monster. The following morning, a trailer was traveling along a busy highway, then turned, as it turned out, in the wrong direction, and began drifting farther and farther from civilization. Inside the trailer, sitting at the table, was a girl named Julie Matthews. She was showing her younger brother Ethan a small figurine in which his favorite character, Norman, had been unlawfully killed by fairies. Behind them, their mother and father, named Tabitha and Jim Matthews, were watching at that moment. The mother, deciding to calm her son, sat beside him and explained that Norman's death was actually a good thing. Ethan asked why. She replied, because fairies don't exist, and since they are not real, Norman had remained alive. Ethan liked this very much. That morning in town, sobered up, Frank finally decided to go home. As he drew closer and closer to his house, he saw people standing outside who were clearly upset and frightened by something. He began to joke. Surely his wife Lauren had invited guests for a cooking show again, but Sheriff Boyd came running out of the house, shouting, "You bastard! What did I tell you? If you have children in your house, you must nail the window shut," and struck him. He then grabbed him by the collar and dragged him inside. Going up to the second floor, the sheriff shoved him into his daughter's room, where his wife Lauren lay on the bed, torn to shreds. And right in front of the open window on the floor lay the slain Megan. The sheriff aimed his pistol at Frank, continuing to repeat that it was all his fault, that he was to blame, and then ordered his deputy to lock him in the room. Coming downstairs, he met the Holy Father Hatry. The sheriff told him he could go upstairs and attend to his business, then noticed the protective amulet lying on the floor, the one that should have been hanging near the door. Around midday, the Matthews family continued their journey in the trailer, each busy with their own affairs, when suddenly Jin spotted some kind of obstacle on the road. They stopped and got out to find a huge fallen tree blocking their way. Jim said that about 1.5 miles back there was a detour, so they would have to make a loop. Ethan asked his father to lift him up onto the tree for a short walk, when suddenly they noticed a large flock of crows circling in the sky. It was a frightening sight that filled them with unease. Without overthinking it, the family decided to get back into the trailer. Meanwhile, Sheriff Boyd came to a woman named Donna, who was the permanent leader of a commune living in a large house on the outskirts of town. He said he simply wanted to see his son. Donna agreed and led him inside. On the upper floor, a young man named Ellis, the sheriff's son, was drawing his beloved girl Fatima, who was very happy to be near him. When Boyd appeared in the doorway to their room, Fatima immediately rushed to embrace him. While Ellis was not at all glad about this visit, the sheriff told him that the previous night Lauren Pratt and her daughter Megan had been killed, and it would be good if he came to the funeral to say goodbye to them. Ellis immediately refused, which greatly saddened the sheriff. After lunch, the Matthews family finally drove into that very town where strange things had been happening. Driving along the central street, they saw numerous cars with flat tires, as well as Sarah sitting on her porch. Soon the trailer pulled up to the place where Megan's and Lauren's funeral was being held at that time. Everyone immediately turned to look at them, forgetting where they were, and the sheriff realized that a new problem had arrived. So he told the townspeople not to disturb the new arrivals. Jin got out of the vehicle and tried to speak with the locals, but was ignored. The sheriff approached him, asking whether he needed help, whereupon Jim explained that they had gone off route and didn't know how to get back to the highway. Boyd pointed to a hill standing in the distance and told them to head toward it without turning off anywhere. Jim then returned to the trailer, and the family continued on their way. As they drove along and discussed these strange people who had ignored them, they suddenly noticed they were entering that same town once again. It was, to say the least, very strange and baffling. Stepping out of his home, Nathan Myers, Sarah's brother, then asked whether they were still going around in circles. Sarah replied, "It's very frightening when you hope to find the road home but cannot." Driving along the same road for what felt like the 100th time, Tabitha and Jim began arguing about whether he had missed a turn. As they tried to prove each other wrong, they drove back into that same town once more. Without overthinking it, Jin turned the trailer around, intent on going back and breaking the loop. The sheriff and his deputy watched their movements and realized the time had come to deploy the spike strip. As the trailer headed back, they saw a car coming toward them, swerving from side to side. To avoid a collision, Jin turned sharply and the trailer flew off the road. Inside the overturned vehicle, he realized he was pinned by a tree and his wife was lying unconscious. He asked Julie whether she was all right. She replied that she was, but Ethan lay motionless with his leg pierced clean through. From the car that had slammed into a tree also crawled a man named Toby McRae. He appeared to have struck his head hard, which made him nauseous, and then he walked away. Meanwhile, the sheriff and his deputy had rolled up the spike strip across the road to stop the trailer. When they suddenly saw Toby approaching, he told them there had been an accident, and there were people there who needed help. The sheriff told his deputy to take Toby to the school building and ran to the accident scene himself. Kenny brought the injured Toby to the spot where Christy met them. She immediately examined his wound, then called Gina and told her to treat his head and also to set up a drip for transfusion if needed. In addition, Christy began gathering medical supplies for the trip. Meanwhile, the car passenger named Jade Herrera regained consciousness and climbed out. The sheriff ran up to him and asked how he was feeling. From the reply, he immediately realized Jade was under the influence of drugs. so he handcuffed him to the car and went to check on the Matthews family. Approaching the trailer, Boyd looked inside and saw Jim trapped and Julie lying on the floor. He explained that he would climb onto the roof and try to open the driver's door. Within a few minutes, Boyd made it inside the trailer. He immediately checked whether Tabitha had a pulse. She was alive. Then he went over to introduce himself to Julie, and having confirmed she was all right, began persuading her to climb out. Meanwhile, when Ellis finally came to the cemetery to say goodbye to the deceased, a car stopped on the road that was heading to the accident site. They told him his father was already there, and it would be dark soon, and they had very little time. After a brief hesitation, Ellis jumped into the bed of the truck. 10 minutes later they arrived at the accident scene, and Christy immediately went over to Jade, asking how he was doing. While she was talking with him, Kenny decided to check on the trailer and saw the sheriff, who had already helped Julie climb out. He returned and told Christy they needed to go to the trailer, leaving the local priest beside Jade. Within a couple of minutes, Ellis and Kenny pulled out Tabitha, who had already regained consciousness. Embracing Julie, she kept asking where Ethan and Jim were. Christy told the sheriff that the boy's leg had been pierced by a table leg, but the artery was undamaged, and he was in stable condition. Boyd then pulled a protective amulet from his pocket and asked Christy to stay in the trailer overnight to save the boy. An hour earlier, Gina had set up a drip for the injured Tom, then led old Mr. Rue down to the basement. As soon as they left, Sarah came to his ward. She assured him of the safety of this place and also gave him a little water to drink. After that, Tom asked her where he was and what had happened to his friend, and when he began growing very agitated over the accident, Sarah simply kissed him. Then, repeating the words, "It's not your fault," she drove a screwdriver straight into his throat. Tom began to bleed out slowly while she simply watched. Christy climbed down inside the overturned trailer, where she told Jim that his wife had come to, and he should go speak with her while she would take care of the boy. Without wasting time, he climbed out. Going over to Tabitha, he calmed her and said their son was all right, but he and Christy would need to stay overnight in the trailer to help Ethan, while Tabitha and their daughter should go into town. A little later, the truck full of people raced back toward town and ran over the spike strip that had been left on the road. Everyone quickly began climbing out of the vehicle to reach shelter before darkness fell. At this time, Boyd was preparing the trailer for nighttime defense against the monsters, covering the windows and attaching the protective amulet at the entrance. Suddenly the boy began to shake from pain shock, and Christy guided Jim on what to do so as not to harm him. And at that very moment, terrible screams and a soul-chilling whisper could be heard from outside. Sheriff Boyd looked out the window and saw monsters in the guise of human beings approaching them from out of the dark forest. Whether they would survive the night was far from certain.